Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Thrive with Holistic Healing Co podcast. Thank you so incredibly much, as always, for being here. So, today's episode, or this week's episode, is all about exercise. Now, why I wanted to launch into exercise and all of the aspects that are important, certainly in my eyes, is because I do believe that it is a very important part of physical health as well as mental health. So, if we want to thrive in how we feel, if we want to thrive with vitality and the abundance of energy and the abundance of prana, this life force energy, then for me, I definitely believe that exercise is a very important part of that whole puzzle. And it forms the letter E in my acronym ARMOR. So the armor that we use, which was actually just in the previous episode, about using that as almost like armor as you would in a war, ARNER. So the 5 pillars to help you move forward and seek the help, seek the treatment, seek the action steps that you need to take in order to be able to walk into your recovery in perinatal mental health. And I would say in all mental health aspects, to be honest, to be perfectly honest, because all of those aspects are true for anyone if you are struggling with your mental health. So definitely the E in that, I wanted to delve into that a little bit deeper and to go into some of the questions that you might have, certainly aspects that I consider important as a health professional, as an Ayurvedic yoga teacher, someone who is an Ayurvedic lifestyle consultant. So I believe that both from a Western medicine, a Western health perspective, it is a crucial part. It's a pillar of health that we would always recommend to our patients, always. It's always something that we would encourage, we would help to motivate, we would help to go through the benefits of what it can do for specific conditions, whether it's diabetes, cardiovascular health, whether it's for, injury rehab if you've had a fall. There's so many different management of conditions where exercise is, I'll say, a prescription, but it is part of the healing and the recovery process. And when we talk about mental health exercise, because of all the benefits that I'll go through, it is a very, very important pillar for treatment, I would say, to hold that person in their entirety. And from an Ayurvedic perspective, I'll go into that as well as to why exercise is an important thing and perhaps some of the considerations that we need to make when we're doing it. So what I'm going to go through today, just as a brief overview, will be the benefits. Why is exercise important? So the why, how much exercise should we do? What are the guidelines? What are the considerations during pregnancy and postpartum when exercising that we need to consider? Safety points to consider during pregnancy and postpartum with exercise. I go through some hints and tips and really some safety information to consider. What if I haven't exercised before? So where do you start? What should I do? What's the recommended increase or incline in exercise prescription per se? So exercise from an Ayurvedic perspective, looking into your PRAKRUTI and your VIKRUTI and what that means exactly. Talking into very briefly, very briefly, I will do another episode, perhaps in a few episode time, about this burnout, this concept of burnout and what we need to consider when burnout, whether it's in motherhood, parenthood, as a working person with children, running a household without perhaps this tribal situation that we've had before, where does exercise come into play? There are certain considerations, certainly in my eyes, and in some of the scientific studies and literature, and from an Ayurvedic perspective as well, as to what sort of considerations you might make if you're experiencing burnout. Right. So that is one. Another point we'll go through will be breastfeeding and exercise. So what other considerations do you need to make whilst breastfeeding? Time of the day, the best times of day to exercise. So from an Ayurvedic perspective and also from a sleep hygiene perspective, What are some examples of low impact exercise? What is resistance training? Why is it important? And what are some practical ways to really incorporate exercise into life with kids? So that's an important, I guess, reality with parenthood. It's all well and good to prescribe or recommend exercise, but how do we do that when we have children, where we have work and careers and businesses and lots of other things that have to happen? Anyway, we'll go into that a little bit more. How can I enhance motivation? That's a very, very important aspect too. And how to, I guess, encourage motivation when you're in the thick of depression and anxiety, right? So we'll go into that aspect and really understanding the complexities that exist there as well. So yes, it's an important part of being able to recover and really looking after you holistically to be able to thrive, but it's also really understanding the practical nature of the reality of depression and anxiety when you don't feel like it, and motivation will be, next to nothing. I get that. I was there. And so I'll go into a little bit more as to what sort of strategies we can employ to actually incorporate it into our life when motivation is not, I guess, flying high. So I guess as a very first disclaimer or a point to note from the very, very outset, I want to reiterate that when I'm speaking of exercise in this space, it's not coming from a space of encouraging weight loss. Now, I do appreciate the impact that weight loss can have on physical markers such as blood glucose and lipids that reduce weight can obviously impart to the physical body. I understand that. But when we're talking about the postpartum period, exercise is not coming from weight loss, drill sergeant, heavy handed, not coming from this harsh criticism towards my body of wanting to become in a state of pre-pregnancy or pre-children. We're not talking about it being a punishment for what we eat or as a reward so that you can eat something. I don't want it to be coming from a space of having to work off the calories from a very harsh, self-critical space. Really, I don't want you to have to work so you can earn a treat from a self-deprecating space. Now, from the outset, this is very much what I'm talking about, that's not the energy in the space that I'm coming from, because that feels very restrictive. It feels very limiting to me in my heart and my body when I say those things. It feels, very, very limiting. But for me, the benefits that what exercise can bring, it feels expansive and life-giving, energy building, vitality building. It feels like a glorious celebration of what our body can do, and absolute gratitude and unconditional love for the vessel, this gorgeous vessel that we've been given. We've been given the privilege of living this life in it, in this form. I mean, I want it to come from that space. I want it to come from a real appreciation of the bounty that our body is and all that it can do. And so in a similar vein to the restrictive limiting thinking, there's a concept in Ayurveda called ama. And ama is this accumulation of undigested materials. So it could be literally undigested food that remains in your body and accumulates within our system, right? It's considered a toxin. And we employ certain practices to help clear the ama or the toxins within our body. But there's also the concept of emotional ama. And I want to bring this topic here because if we are, when we're talking about food or nutrition or exercise, if we're doing it from a space of, say, if we're eating something, we'll say hot chips, fried food, and we're eating every mouthful and we're thinking we shouldn't have this isn't good for us, this is not, whatever, or having a glass of wine, this is toxic, this isn't good for me. We're actually, by thinking thoughts of guilt and shame and of not wanting to do it, we're actually adding emotional armor. And so that can be more deleterious to our body and more disastrous to our body in terms of consuming this emotional armor that will accumulate, and it perhaps might fester on your shoulders. It might fester in inflammation. It might fester in If we think about the energy systems and how our mind, body, and spirit is all connected, rather than filling our body with love and gratitude that we have food to eat, if we're filling it with this guilt and shame and the negative connotation, then that is an emotional armor and it isn't something that is conducive to our system. And so when it comes to exercise as well, if we're doing it as a punishment and from this restrictive space, then we're adding emotional armor and we might be counterproductive in terms of thinking we're doing something beneficial. But if we're slogging our body like a horse racing, we don't need to do that to our body. It's a celebration of what our body can do. It should be a celebration of, and normally I don't like that word should, but it is a way that we can really celebrate how our body can move. And often it's times of being in ill health, if we've had an injury, that we can appreciate what our body can do. But imagine if we could harness and encompass that every single day, then what a glorious celebration of our gorgeous body that we would have. And that's really come to me with time, with age. I used to be a lot more from that limiting, restrictive, harsh, denigrating energy space than I am now. I'm very much more kind to my body. I listen to her so incredibly much. And she tells me what it is that I need to be aware of. And I listen to her because she has so much wisdom running through her veins. She really does. And so whatever I do, I really am mindful with the energy that I bring behind it. And I speak about this a lot, whether it was in goal setting, whether it's in nutrition, whether it's in, all aspects of our self-talk. And if we're a lot more gentle and nourishing and nurturing to ourselves like we would to our small child, then our body, our mind, our spirit is going to feel supported and held in the most glorious way. Anyway, I digress as I do. So let's jump right in. So why is exercise important? Why? Why is everyone telling me to exercise? Exercise can enhance the endorphin, and endorphins really help to assist in stress and pain relief within our body. So we have around 20 different endorphins within our body. We have our own little pharmaceutical lab happening within our body. Every action can produce a reaction in our biochemistry. I am always amazed and always fascinated by the cause and effect that we have in our system. I think it's a beautiful miracle. And I think our bodies are absolutely amazing. And so exercise increases the levels of endorphins in our body. And that is a good thing. Exercise can enhance serotonin. Now, this is a chemical that's required for so many things. So for mood, sleep, digestion, nausea, wound healing, sexual desire, and so much more. More serotonin is going to make us feel good. Now, a study by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, they found that running for 15 minutes a day or walking for an hour a day reduces the risk of major depression by 26%. 26% is, a very, very large number in terms of an improvement in reducing the risk of major depression. To me, that's very, very pivotal. Exercise can enhance oxygenated blood circulating through our body. So think more energy, more vitality, especially in our brain. Usually after I've exercised, I feel like someone vacuumed my brain. If that was the most perfect analogy, like all of the nooks and crannies and the curls and turn, someone's just gone in there and vacuumed and it feels clear. I feel like I have more clarity. It's like that heavy fogginess. Just it can breathe. It literally has been oxygenated. So that's definitely from a physiological standpoint. Exercise enhances muscle and bone strength. So we're reducing our risk of things like osteoporosis and arthritis just by partaking in it, just by using our muscles and our bones, especially through resistance training. We're improving our bone density. It's reducing the predisposition to fractures and severe injuries. It's going to enhance flexibility and balance. So again, that's going to reduce or help to reduce our risk of fall, especially as we get older, but also during pregnancy, if we think about how our equilibrium our sense of gravity, and, our whole body changes. Reducing a reduced risk of falls is very, very important there. So it can boost our HDL, so our good cholesterol, and it can lower our triglycerides. So it's going to improve our overall cardiovascular health, which is going to be excellent. Improving the quality of sleep. Now, obviously, if we're going to be exercising during the day, we're utilizing our energy, we're producing more endogenous energy versus relying on a coffee, which is going to be a stimulant, producing seemingly huge amounts of energy, but it's not. It's just an exogenous source. It's a stimulant. It's upregulating certain neurotransmitters and chemicals to make you feel like you're focused and have clarity. But exercise actually does enhance energy. So it's going to improve the quality of sleep. But when we talk of sleep hygiene, we don't want to do vigorous exercise within 90 minutes of bedtime. Now, that's because it's going to put you in an alert, hyper-aroused, hyperactive state, and we don't want that as we're winding down to sleep. Group exercise, if we're doing it with friends, whether we're meeting people, it's such a beautiful social aspect, and that can help to increase our sense of community. It can bring fun, it can bring connection, and that is very, very important as well in our mental health space, in our feeling of belonging, and just our overall feeling of well-being. We're looking at our mind, body, spirit always, always, always. That triangle, that pyramid is something that I'm always so passionate about, making sure that every aspect and arm is looked after. So that's why it's important. Okay. So many different benefits. What is the amount that we actually should exercise? So people say exercise, but how much? Now, the Australian Government Department of Health, their recommendations or their guidelines for people aged between 18 to 64. So there's actually different age groups, and I'm linking the website to that particular resource where different age groups, there's certain recommendations of what that exercise capacity and levels and amounts and ideas as well as to how you can incorporate that. They've got different age groups. So from 18 to 64 years in that bracket, the guidelines are to be active on most, preferably all days of the week, to accumulate 150 to 300 minutes. So that equates to 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate intensity physical exercise or activity, or 75 to 150 minutes, which is 1.25 to 2.5 hours of vigorous activity each week. Now I'm going to summarize, I'll just put that as a sentence in the show notes so you don't have to memorize what that number is. But we're thinking anywhere from 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate exercise, or 1.25 to 2.5 hours of vigorous activity each week. To do muscle strength resistance training on at least 2 of those days per week. So the Eat, Move, Live link that I have in the show notes, I absolutely love that because it actually resonates to me with that sense of honoring our body and granting ourselves some grace and trying to really encourage it as a beautiful aspect in our life and not a chore and not something that you have to cross off the list. I'm going to quote what's on their website. So think of movement as an opportunity, not an inconvenience. Love it. Be active every day in as many ways as you can. It's not stipulating a set prescription of what you need to do and make sure you do this. It's trying to encourage incidental exercise. It's trying to encourage a change in your mindset to perhaps, maybe I'll take the stairs instead of the lift. It's encouraging you to just try to do as much more physical activity as you can. And that is going to be great. That's going to be a step forward. So put together at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity on most days, and even split them into 3 times 10-minute intervals. Now, if that is not the most grace-inducing and the most flexible approach, I don't know what else is. It's saying that you can dedicate 3 times a 10-minute session throughout your day to reach that goal. That to me feels it feels very flexible and it feels very practical. and gentle and soft. And that's why I love it. So check that link out. Now, what are the considerations during pregnancy and the postpartum period when we're exercising? Now, I'm going to link the most recent health recommendations on this particular topic. So on the healthdirect.gov website, and health.gov.au also as well has some wonderful information. So as you can imagine, here on a very general podcast, it's going to be very difficult for me to give specific advice about your particular situation, what your health condition is, what your previous fitness levels are, the status of your pregnancy or postpartum condition or physical body, where you're at. I mean, it's impossible for me to know that. So I would always encourage you to speak to your particular physician, whether it's your GP, your obstetrician, your midwife, your women's health physio, whoever it is that's looking after you, to find out exactly what's relevant to your particular situation, okay? Because we're all different. So that's just as a very brief and very obvious disclaimer. However, on those guidelines, if you and your baby are considered healthy, then the physical and sedentary behavior guidelines for adults, which we discussed before, then they're relevant, generally speaking, to that broad population as well. Now, you might have to tailor the exercise depending on where you are in your stage versus what you were doing pre-pregnancy. It can be very fit, active athlete that are very much able and capable, and their bodies are adept to be able to handle whatever. That's obviously an individual approach. But the benefits really of staying active and staying healthy and staying exercising throughout your pregnancy is that it prepares for labor and recovery. Another benefit is there's a lower risk of gestational diabetes, less back pain and pelvic pain, a lower risk of incontinence, better mental health, and a lower risk of postnatal depression. So that is on the Health Direct website. Now, as a side note, for full transparency, as I always do, in my experience, the first pregnancy, I gained a ridiculous amount of weight. I mean, I'm very, very candid about the fact that I took caution to the wind. I gained far too much weight. I didn't exercise enough, not from a self-deprecating space, but I attributed that, and I thought that that was a causative factor for my postnatal depression the first time. So the second pregnancy, I exercised amazingly every single day. I did an antenatal yoga class weekly throughout, right until delivery. And I was very active. I mean, amazingly, I only gained a third of the amount of weight, well within the healthy guidelines. I was very proud of myself. My obstetrician was proud of myself. But still, despite this, on day 5, I still had postnatal depression. So for me, it was my genetic makeup, my biochemistry, what it is that I was born with. So what my point of this whole story is that it didn't stop me from getting postnatal depression. However, I do believe that it enabled me to have a successful VBAC. And I also attributed a causative factor of my first pregnancy was that I ended up with an emergency C-section. So I believed that the way I birthed my baby caused my postnatal depression. Ironically, funnily enough, was meant to be. It proven me that I had a VBAC, and it didn't change the outcome. So exercise did, I believe, encourage my body to be able to birth my child naturally. I'm grateful that I did, and I experienced that. And it was a beautiful birth experience. I only have amazing memories of it, but it didn't change the outcome of me having postnatal depression. So that's just something that I want to be very clear about, that for me, it didn't stop me from getting postnatal depression. So if you're in that same situation where you're thinking, gosh, but I exercised every day, why do I have postnatal depression? You know what? It's okay. I was the same. It's definitely not a black and white situation where if you exercise, you're not going to get postnatal depression. However, I do believe that the benefits far outweighed the actual, yes, I still got postnatal depression, but, my physical body was amazing. Perhaps my situation may have been worse. We'll never know, but I still am an advocate for exercise. I just wanted to share my experience with that last point, that for me, it didn't stop me from getting postnatal depression. So really to give yourself some grace if you're in that situation and you can't understand why you have it, even though you're so fit physically and that you exercise all the time. Well, sometimes biochemistry trumps. Biochemistry trumps the reduced predisposed risk of postnatal depression, if that makes sense. So during pregnancy, when we're talking about exercise, well, what's the difference between moderate intensity versus vigorous intensity? So we want to do the talk test where whilst you're exercising, if you're able to talk, then that's a moderate intensity exercise. So if you're exercising and you're not able to talk, that's considered vigorous intensity exercise. So that's just something to keep in mind. You'll have to factor that in as to what feels comfortable for you based on your fitness levels. Again, speak to your trained health professional to determine what is your prescription or what is an acceptable amount of exercise for you, perhaps with your certain conditions. There's so many different health conditions that you would need to consider chatting about. But, a women's health physio is an incredible resource. I cannot speak highly of them enough. I think they're real masters in this field, and to utilize them. Now, in terms of safety points to consider when you're exercising during pregnancy and the postpartum period, the first point is that there is a higher risk of falling. Okay, as I mentioned before, change of gravity, your center of gravity, the fact that you're carrying this weight on your stomach, you need to take care with your balance and exactly what you're doing. So be careful of the terrain. Be careful of if it's an uneven surface. Be careful if you're adding something as well that is going to be making you unbalanced. Perhaps if you have allergies or vertigo as well, concurrently, then that risk of imbalance is heightened. So pay attention to exactly how you're feeling. How are your ears? Balance is very much centered within our inner ear. So keep that in mind. So anything that requires heavy lifting. So you've got this big weight on the front, consider issues or consider your lower back as being a very sensitive area. Your pelvic floor, to make sure that you're bracing. Are you doing it correctly? There can be strain in the core region. So being very, very careful. And there's a lot of controversy, I guess, when we see trained athletes who are pregnant, doing heavy lifting and bodybuilding or, weight training. That's not my place or space to speak about. That's something that's individualized. That's something based on your previous health status and what you're used to doing, getting it clear with your doctor, with your unique pregnancy and postpartum journey. But anything that requires heavy lifting, I always would say to err on the side of caution. If in doubt, just don't pick it up at all. Be very, very careful. So anything that changes the pressure significantly, so scuba diving or skydiving, then you need to consider that. Now, would you be skydiving when you're pregnant? I'm not sure. I certainly wouldn't be doing that. And scuba diving, gosh, don't get me started on my scuba diving experience in Cairns. Let's just say that I'm a land animal and not a water animal. But anyway, with any changes in pressure, to consider that during pregnancy. Anything that gives you pain or discomfort, stop immediately. That's a very, very important point. Now, it's also very, very important during pregnancy and the postpartum journey to stay hydrated while you're exercising. To avoid exercising in a very hot climate. So if it's an extremely hot day, be careful. Humidity can make you sweat even more, and that can lead to dehydration. Dehydration is obviously not good for the baby. Our bodies are over 70% of water. We're thinking it can give you postural hypertension, dizziness. So if you're standing, risk of falls. We really need to be very, very careful. Every single cell in our body requires adequate amounts of water. So you need to be hydrated. So whilst you're exercising, the advice also is to avoid standing still or lying down for long periods of time. So also taking care in excess altitude, so above 2,000 meters. So if you're hiking or bushwalking or anything like that, taking care of the incline and the altitude, so that change can cause, I guess, other considerations when you're pregnant. This would really pertain to anyone, but especially in pregnancy, to make sure you've got beautiful, supportive shoes. So ones that are going to be very stable, non-restrictive clothing. So clothing that's not too tight or going to make you feel too hot. And a supportive bra. So as our breast tissue changes during pregnancy and our milk coming in, or postpartum and the milk has come in, there are changes, and we want to make sure that it's comfortable, that we feel supported whilst we're exercising. Now, my postpartum advice extra to this would be at the 6-week post-birth check. I would always encourage you to get an all clear, a physical check by whether it's your GP, your obstetrician, and a women's health physio is so incredibly fantastic to be able to assess your pelvic floor strength at that 6-week mark. You can discuss what sort of exercises you can begin. Now, after the process of birth, there may be hemorrhoids, it could be prolapse, there could be a hernia, there could be, any and all sorts of things that can happen as a result of the birthing process. So getting specific information for you will be necessary. If you have hemorrhoids or a prolapse, is cycling going to be the best exercise? Perhaps not. You want to take care of that pressure, and you want to make sure that the area is healing correctly. If you've had to have stitches, has it healed beautifully? Is it clean? Is it healing nicely? So in the postpartum period, yes, I would say gentle walking is always going to be the safest, and starting at a slow pace and increasing as you go, and really building exercises, I always would say, from the 6-week check based on your specific advice. So women's health physios highly recommend Pregnancy with Physio Laura, and she has her own podcast, and she has lots of resources on her website in terms of exercising and looking after the pelvic floor. And she has a pregnancy posse as well that you can join. So definitely hop on, love her work. So what if I haven't exercised before? So if you're sitting there thinking, I haven't exercised properly, I'm not consistently exercising. So what does that mean? Now, according to the RACGP, so the Royal Australian College of GPs, the recommendation of exercise is to increase gradually. So to increase by 5 to 10% at a time to reduce the risk of injury or flare-ups, or pain flare-ups rather. So, it could be increasing 5 to 10% perhaps over a week period, and then slowly increase over certain designated increments, right? Now, I'll tell you a little story about my own self. So we bought, first of January, we bought a Nordic exercise bike. Now, I went from, really not exercising much, certainly not cycling since before Kayan was born. So 4 years ago, I hopped on the bike, and the programs are so amazing. I felt like I literally thought I was Lance Armstrong. So I was doing the bike maybe 3 times a day. I'm an all or nothing person. Again, that's one of the mindsets that I speak of in my book, one that I, constantly am working through. But I went from 0 to working out 3 times a day on this bike. I was doing, different circuits with weights, and I was hovering on the bike and, standing up and pedaling things I've never done before. Long story short, I now have not been able to exercise. I think I'm at 3.5 weeks now, because I injured my ankle doing absolutely nothing, but all of the muscles clearly on my left leg, which apparently is a little bit shorter than my right leg. Sorry, I'm not sure why I'm laughing, but yes, anyway, all of the muscles on my left-hand side have seized. So my ankle is, yes, it's very inflamed and annoyed. Yes, 3.5 weeks later, I'm slowly seeing some respite and some improvement. So I completely can appreciate the slowly increasing it. 5 to 10% feels manageable, feels realistic. I think it's a very controlled and measured way to slowly increase. So I would start slow and slowly increase it. Now, a weekly increment may be good. If you're really, you really haven't exercised for years and years and years, then perhaps 5 to 10% over a longer period of time. Check in how you're feeling. Are you able to do those exercises before you increase it? Now, it could be the amount of time in your exercise program. It could be the number of times you're training in the week. Certainly just see where you're at and keep that amount in mind. So the other thing to note is that slow and steady wins the race. So it can take up to 66 days to establish a habit. And so I would say that keeping that figure in mind, if you show up to work with the end goal in mind, to do little things every single day. Now, in terms of exercise from an Ayurvedic perspective, so Ayurveda is actually a very individualized approach to health and wellness. It's really looking at your lifestyle and practices and your nutrition. What is your natural constitution? What were you born with? What is your imbalance currently, which is known as your Vikruti? Your natural constitution is called your Prakruti. Where are you at any one point in time? It's constantly changing. There's an appreciation and an understanding that we are constantly ebbing and flowing, that we're not ever fixed, stuck in a certain place, because we are impacted by what we are consuming in our senses, what we're eating, what we're touching, what we're listening to, smelling, the environment that we're in. So that's what I love most about Ayurveda, in that it considers all of the different aspects and attributes and the impact that it has on a very subtle level within our body. And exercise is actually no different, because it's an understanding of what your true nature is, what's your imbalance. Okay, let's choose some form of exercise that's going to be most conducive to you. So what does that mean? So for example, for someone who has a Pitta constitution, or a Pitta Prakruti, as we would call it. So I have a Vata Pitta constitution. So I'm filled with air and space, and I'm filled with the fire and water element, generally speaking. Now, someone with a Pitta aggravation, which is going to have too much fire and water, now if they do, say, boxing or fast intensity running, they're sprinting and they're, just imagine that, like very fast paced, intense, and we're increasing this heat within our body, then there's a very high potential that that's going to increase that Pitta within that body and create more Pitta aggravation. And that can be seen. So some examples of a Pitta aggravation, which is too much heat, can be too much inflammation. It can be, which very much I would say is happening to my foot injury. There's inflammation because I'm adding, all of this heat all of a sudden, and there's excess Pitta now. There could be redness in the face, boils. There could be more irritable and angry and quick temper and things like that. So there is a cause and effect from adding too much heat and too much fire within the body. Now, whereas if a Pitta type of person with a Pitta aggravation does, say, swimming in a cool pool, so fluid, slow, deliberate, strokes in a cooler pool, that's a very low impact. You're still getting your exercise, you're still using your muscles, but you're not creating that much heat within your body. So that would be a very thing. Also, if that person was to partake in slow yin or a restorative type of yoga versus like a hot Bikram yoga that's very hot and it's going to be very heating to their body, perhaps doing yoga nidra at night to help sleep, that's all really going to help pacify that heat. It's going to bring balance. It's exercising, absolutely, but it's not coming from that fire aspect and increasing that heat within the body. Now, someone with a Vata imbalance, so when there's excess air and space, again, too much movement. So say if you're doing a fast-paced stop-start type of activity, if they imbalance those attributes or qualities are things like being cold, rough, hard. There's 10 opposing pairs in terms of the qualities. We want to really encourage an exercise that's going to be heating. So a yoga where we're utilizing a lot of grounding poses or asanas, like the warrior and mountain pose and the tree pose, things that are really using our lower body and our big quad muscles that's going to generate heat. That is going to help bring balance to this Vata aggravation. Whereas, say, swimming in a cold pool, in the example that would help a Pitta type of person, well, swimming in a cold pool, especially in winter, someone who has that Vata aggravation already, that's not going to be the best for them. It's going to increase that cool, cold aspect we want heat. We would be better off doing Bikram yoga. That's actually going to increase that heat and movement within our body. And so it's just really considering those sorts of elemental aspects and qualities as to what is the imbalance and how can we restore that. Now, a kapha, I don't really often speak about kapha, but kapha is made up of the earth and the water element. So a kapha imbalance, if there's too much kapha, then we actually need to bring air and space to lighten it. So that is going to counteract the earth and the water qualities that's there. So perhaps a faster style hatha yoga is going to be quite good for them. Going for a brisk walk, I mean, it's going to be hard to motivate them or get them moving initially, but having a faster pace with, that's a bit more, even going for a run, if they can manage that increased air and space, that movement is going to be good for them because it's going to balance that earthy kind of quality. So I hope that makes sense. Definitely, you would consider attributes like the weather, like the food that you're eating, the time of day that you're going to exercise. From an Ayurvedic perspective, when we're talking about the time of day to exercise, so I spoke about how in sleep hygiene, you don't want to exercise 90 minutes before sleep. I 100% agree. It's going to make you aroused, awake, alert, energized. Exercise earlier in the day. That's going to utilize your energy. It'll feel better. Now, in terms of Ayurveda, there are certain times of the day. So there's the hours of 2 to 6, whether that's AM or PM, 6 till 10 AM to PM, and then 10 till 2 AM to PM. It's just a cycle, right? Now, if you exercise between the hours of 2 to 6 AM or PM, then that's actually in the Vata time of day. So that's when there's the most air and space. So that's actually going to be probably the easiest time to exercise because you're more likely to be awake. So if you wake up, say, before 6, you'll find that you're a lot more energized and it's easier to kind of spring out of bed than, say, if you get up after 6. So if you get up between the hours of 6 and 10, which is your kapha period, often if you sleep in, you feel more sluggish and lethargic because you're in that earth time of day and you feel more sluggish, right? So it's actually easier, you often spring out of bed in the hours of 2 to 6 AM because that's when there's naturally in the cycles of the day, there's more movement, there's more air and space qualities. So that would be, a good time to exercise. The best time of day to eat lunch is actually noon, so at midday. That's when your pitta is at its peak. You're best able to digest your food. It's going to be the best or most able to be assimilated in your body and your cells. So that's wonderful and amazing. And in terms of the evening, between the hours of 2 to 6 PM would be the best time to exercise as well. We really try not to eat after 8 PM if possible, to eat earlier. That's the best. And ideally, from an Ayurvedic perspective, you would be asleep by 10. Asleep at 10, wake up at 6. They're going to be your most conducive hours where you'll sleep in that pitta period between 10 and 2, and you can digest, assimilate, process what's happened in the day. From an Ayurvedic perspective, that's the ideal time so that you can actually process everything that's happened through the day. It enables less armor in our body, both from an emotional and a metabolic or digestive space point of view. Okay, so now we move to the concept of burnout and the considerations to make when we're talking about exercise and burnout. Now, I know that it's a little bit controversial in that, is it an actual condition? Definitely it's something that I've experienced where you just feel lack of motivation to do anything because you're so exhausted. You're so like a little mouse pedaling on this little wheel and you almost feel like you're running out of energy. You're just feeling like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Right? And that's essentially, if we think from a physiological standpoint, it's because we're in this fight or flight way of being where we're on. And so our cortisol is firing all the time. We think that there's a lion chasing us. And so we're in this fight or flight stage. And I think this happens for me personally. I believe it's because we have an information and a stimulus overload. Our phones are constantly dinging. We're getting messages. Even on the laptop, you get breaking news pop up. You get weather updates. I mean, honestly, you get notifications even on your car. Things pop up. Stuff happening everywhere in amongst the hustle and bustle of life and time pressures of being places at times. And I also think it's because of our lack of tribe, and we're living such an individual life. I truly believe that where families are just what are in those four walls, and you can catch up with people or friends or family, but having that tribal help where there it takes a village to raise a family. I believe that, but I feel like that's been lost in our current life, whether we move from different places, whether, because of work, or everyone's so busy, or traffic's so bad that you can't commute so easily to different people, to offer that help. So that's why I believe it happens. And so we're left to do everything, the responsibilities to rear a child and all that entails, housekeeping and all that entails, having a career and all that entails, business ownership and all that entails, and the list goes on. There's no need to add stress to your day already. But yeah, I think that there is this real capacity to burn out because we're working ever so much. We're living for holiday time, really, so we can switch off and not have to be responsible. But I think with parenthood, unfortunately, fortunately, depending on, how you see things, that's going to be the reality of life. And so when we're talking about exercise, if you're in this burnout period, now when you have this cortisol running in fight, flight, you feel like you've got all this energy, there can very much be a perspective that you can do more. I can go to the gym. You feel like you've got this energy. But what happens is when this, I believe, almost like the system will shut down and eventually cortisol won't function the way it needs to. You're reaching for more and more coffee to give you that same effect. You need energy, but you're just running off empty, so to speak. So for me, the perspective of pumping hours at the gym or doing an F45 session and pounding the pavements, running, for me, that feels like it feels like we're being productive and exercising, absolutely. But I'm not necessarily convinced that that's the best for our nervous system. So we want to do things that are going to nourish our nervous system, to slow it down, provide exercise that's grounding, very much as to what I was saying before with the Pitta and the Vata constitution. Things like slow yin yoga is going to be beautiful. Restorative yoga, that's going to help nourish our system. Even slow, so Ayurvedic based yoga, where we're trying to use grounding, mountain pose, for example, or warrior asanas to really help anchor, root, heat our body. It feels nourishing. We're getting that burn. Resistance training is going to be very helpful. Gentle walks, even. You could even carry some weights to give you that increase in resistance training. Using resistance bands, that's going to be heating and nourishing. It's not going to be depleting our adrenal system anymore. And so I'll do another episode in detail more about this because I think that it's a real issue that we're facing. And from a Western perspective, blood markers may not fall in the parameters of being diagnosed with Addison's or Cushing's or an actual adrenal condition, but there very much can be shades of gray in between where, say if we are talking about burnout, that we're just run down. We've worked ourselves to the bone where from the crack of dawn to the evening when the kids are finally in bed, we just lie on the couch and numb ourselves, whether it's the TV or with alcohol or with whatever it may be, fill in the blank for you. But I think that our beautiful systems need to be nourished and rejuvenated again. And I think that modern life is not really conducive to that anymore. And so we need to be very conscious with where our energy goes, where our time goes, and where we're spending it, everything like that. And so exercise, I feel, should be something that is going to be low impact. Swimming would be a beautiful one to do in a warm pool. If you have a Vata aggravation, making sure you're covered and wearing a swimming cap on your head. making sure that it's warm, or doing Pilates, which is very low impact, but you're feeling the burn. It's very gentle, but it is a workout 100%. Perhaps light weights are very, very good. Gentle walking, we're incorporating mindfulness as you're stepping. You're being mindfully feeling your heel touching, pressing on the ground as you're walking, seeing what's around you. What can you hear? Making it a very connective process. That to me is going to really help the nervous system. It's very much a food for thought. It's something that I personally find very, very fascinating, that we want to choose the right form of exercise based on where you are and what's happening in how you're feeling. And so that requires an introspection. It requires observation. It requires us to sometimes think outside of the routine and the things that we're used to doing. It requires sometimes to change our path a little bit. And then we can come back, once we, are recalibrated and feel aligned again, we can go back to what we used to. So that's the fluidity of life. But I think that we need to observe how we're feeling. Now, breastfeeding and exercise. Now, the Australian Breastfeeding Association has an excellent resource. So I'll link that in the show notes. And that really gives up-to-date or relevant current information about exercise and breastfeeding. So according to ABA, moderate exercise, which is we're doing that talk test, it won't affect the levels of lactic acid, the important immune factors, major nutrients, energy density, or major minerals. Intense exercise can increase lactic acid, but there's currently no evidence to suggest that breast milk with an increased level of lactic acid will harm your baby. So in essence, there's no restriction in exercise when we're talking about breastfeeding. I guess my side note would be to ensure that you have supportive bra. If you are breastfeeding and you have your baby with you, to, I guess, make sure that your bra is, one that you can easily feed with if you're out and about, and it's not a big, cumbersome, laborious thing that stops you from wanting to exercise, if that makes sense. And I would also definitely add to maintain adequate hydration whilst you're exercising and you're breastfeeding. So you really want to make sure that you're not becoming dehydrated, especially in hot and humid weather. That's very, very important. And I would also say with caffeine consumption, if you're having coffee whilst you're breastfeeding, then caffeine being a diuretic, that it's going to require you to have more water anyway when you're consuming caffeine. So if you're exercising with coffee as well, then you're going to need more water to put back what you're losing. If it's a hot day, you're going to need to put back even more. Now, the recommendation from the Raising Children Network is currently to have 10 cups of water a day for a breastfeeding woman, but that will increase with humid and hot days. So that's definitely going to be a benchmark, and you increase that based on what sort of activities you're doing. Now, in terms of how do you know if you're dehydrated, or how do you know if you're getting enough fluid in your body? First of all, to look at your urine. So that's a really good indicator to know that you're getting enough fluid. So first, the frequency, the volume, how much there is, the color of it is so important. So it needs to be a pale yellow. It will change depending on, if you're on certain prescription medication. That's going to be my, disclaimer there. But it shouldn't be a dark color urine. So that really is indicating that you're not having enough water. And look at your milk production. Is it changing within your body? You would observe certain changes happening, as well how you're feeling. So things like postural or orthostatic hypertension, when you say you're getting a bit dizzy or off balance upon rising or standing or from sitting. And so, is that happening? That can definitely be a sign that, oh gosh, maybe I need more fluid. I need more water. And water is always going to be the fluid of choice when we're talking about hydration, not sugary drinks, not fizzy drinks, not anything from a factory or things like that. We really want pure, filtered, ideally, water. From an Ayurvedic perspective, hot water or warm water is better than cold water for our digestive fire. The colder it is, it dampens that digestive fire and the capacity to digest well. And so I always tell my husband off when he's drinking icy water. I don't judge him, but I always tell him, it should be room temperature, if anything. Boiled water is even amazing. Hot water, add some ginger. That's going to really improve our agni and be able to digest our food so we can assimilate it even more beautifully. Anyway, I will link the betterhealth.vic.gov information article about water consumption, if that's something that you're interested in looking into further. Now, what are some examples of low impact exercises? So when we're talking about impact on all of our joints, on our pelvic floor, our core, high impact, netball, stop, start. I rolled my ankle playing netball. Basketball, it's the same on our knees and ankles and joints, stop, start. Tennis, I actually do quite find that quite jolting on the joints as well. Now, if you compare that to, say, cycling, that's very low impact unless you fall off. Rowing, very beautiful, seamless, flowing motion. Swimming is going to be very low impact, very much movement, flow-based. Yoga, of course, and Pilates. I think Pilates is another very low impact example of exercise. And the reason why we want to do that is to help support our pelvic floor whilst we're pregnant, postpartum. We want to make sure that we're looking after our joints as well. So when there is more relaxin circulating through our system during pregnancy, that affects all of our joints. It helps our hips and pelvis open to prepare for birth. And it does take time for that to settle post-birth, but really, it can predispose us perhaps to injury or misalignment within our joints. I guess the other thing is just, I feel like our bodies give us wisdom. They give us information. I think we're all very intuitive beings. And if we take the time to listen to what our body's telling us, you'll feel what's right and what's not sort of aligning with your current state, and to go and flow with that. So what is resistance training and why is it important? So in those guidelines, it said for weight resistance training to be incorporated in 2 of those days per week. And so when we're talking about resistance training, we're talking about utilizing free weights. So even from half a kilo up to, really big, large dumbbells, machines. If you've got access to a gym or at your home and have, lots of weight machines, your own body weight, even push-ups or tricep dips on your couch or sofa, that's considered resistance training, and you're using your own body weight. Resistance bands, why it's important is that it helps to improve muscle strength and muscle tone. So that's very, very important. It helps to improve flexibility and balance. It increases our bone density and strength. Now, this becomes particularly important when we're talking about osteoporosis. We really want to support our bone health by increasing how dense our bones are. So unless you're getting a bone density scan, regularly, there's really no way to see how strong your bones are, apart from if you're getting lots of fractures or injuries, then that's a telltale sign, I would say, to go get some blood tests and some scanning done. But really, to support our bone health, resistance training is so incredibly important. And it doesn't have to be bodybuilding exercises where you're training to become a professional bodybuilder. It doesn't need to be as extreme as that. But also, another good thing that I like about it personally is that as you gain muscle, your body actually burns more kilojoules when it rests. So generally when you're exercising a particular muscle group, to do that, say, every 48 hours or to give it a rest so that those muscle fibers can rebuild and recover from the exercise. And whilst it's doing that, because you're burning or you're using muscle, that it's actually burning more kilojoules. So your resting metabolic rate will tend to improve. And I think that if we're talking about efficiency, that to me feels like a very efficient gift that keeps on giving, even after you've been exercising. So that's why for me personally, I enjoy it very much. But also coming from the standpoint of bone health, I very much like that. Now, from a practical standpoint, in terms of how do you incorporate exercise with children, now whether they're newborns or whether they're, 8-year-old or 9, like whatever age and stage, that it changes. I think that's a very important point to note. Their needs change, what your day looked like changes. And so being able to fit it in will depend on if you have a newborn, a school-age child, a toddler, or anything else in between. Now, if we're thinking that we want to do 30 minutes as a minimum for 7 days a week, so that's 210 minutes. So we were in our goal, right? We're doing 30 minutes a day, 7 days a week. We can even split that into 2 times 15-minute lots or 3 times 10-minute lots if that feels more achievable and is something that's able to be done. So we can make it incidental. So if you park a little bit further and walk, that might be helpful. Taking the stairs versus the escalator. If we're walking versus taking public transport or driving somewhere where you can, that will require you to leave a little bit earlier, which may or may not be your trigger point, as it is mine. So you could walk with your baby in the pram. I used to love putting my babies in the carrier, so the baby Bjorn or this other one. Gosh, I've actually forgotten the name of it, but it just felt like Kai was right nuzzled up next to me, and I used to love that. Like I was just holding him. It was like a nice, thin, beautiful little blanket material that I would wrap around me, and yeah, it was beautiful. Anyway, so that was a win-win because I'd feel close to them. They would go to sleep and then I was walking. Enjoyed that very much. Also, you could do mat work, yoga, Pilates while your baby's doing tummy time on the mat with you. It's a good time to connect and get on the floor with them. If there's a gym with a creche, that's fantastic. Then they get to meet friends and socialize as well, if that's something that you're comfortable with doing. There can be a lot of group outdoor mum classes, so check your local neighborhood, your Facebook group. The Child Health Centre might have some information or leaflets as to, where you can go for that. There are a lot of home programs. Now, I've read about this in my book as well, because I've actually purchased in my, 8 years of being a mum, 13 including Rufus, our dog. I've purchased quite a number of programs that I've done at home, sort of in and out throughout those years. Some which I've stuck to, some which I haven't for whatever reason. So Kayla, I actually can't pronounce her surname, but Kayla, it seems. But anyway, she's very, very famous. So with her sweat app and her BBG, bikini body, or whatever her program was, I've forgotten now. But there's Emily Sky, there's Sarah B. I actually think she's beautiful. And she's part also now with Sam Wood. And she's so, so lovely. I actually remember messaging her a few times when I bought her program that didn't come through properly and blah, blah, blah. But she's very receptive and responsive. And yes, I enjoy her very, very much. Shani and Julius, they've got a pregnancy and a postpartum program. And of course, my lovely physio Laura that I speak about all the time. My big one, which I mentioned in the beginning, is to really be kind and forgiving and loving to yourself and to be flexible. So you can have your best laid plans. And if your day falls apart, which it can with kids, with life, to be kind and forgiving to yourself. I think that's going to be the grace that you need to grant to yourself. I also am very much an advocate for being kind to ourselves, but I also am very much mindfully aware that however we feel and look, it's very much to do with our self-esteem. And so exercise, body image, self-esteem are all interlinked and all interrelated. And I believe that I don't want you to try to fix your body. There's nothing broken. There's nothing damaged. It's changed. It's changing. It can change for the better post-children. There's not always this notion that children make your body worse. It doesn't always have to be that way. And so I also come from a space of, flooding our system with the gratitude, and that, when we feel better, we feel better. And when we feel better, we feel better. It's almost a pyramid scheme. And it's somewhat addictive, where if we can keep going for the better thought, we feel better. And so that's something that I feel to do with body image and self-esteem that can definitely go hand in hand. Now, the question of motivation. So how can I actually enhance motivation? So the first strategy would definitely be to write a mission statement, or to write a goal, or something that's going to keep you accountable, and something that's powered by your why. Now, your why may be very different to my why, and that's okay. But I think knowing what the energy and motivation behind what it is that you want, your goal could be fitting in a particular size, or it could be that you want to work out a number of days a week. Mine could be to be consistently adding it as a daily non-negotiable. Whatever it is, have your commitment statement, your motivation. It'll help to keep you accountable. Keep it somewhere where you can see it often. Setting out your clothes the night before is more a practical reality where if it's there, you're easy to spring up, go, just get changed. You might have a few designated workout outfits. Just pick, get ready, go. You don't have to think about it. It doesn't have to be an extra mental load because that very much can happen when you already have lots of people to look after. So you might get motivated by sticking to a schedule that might help you live within, certain confines and boundaries. Or you might need to be flexible and just, have your active wear ready and on for whenever you can exercise, whenever you see windows of opportunity in your day, that you take it and you're in your gear, you're ready to go. That's another perhaps strategy. Rewarding yourself. So say it's at the end of the week for reaching your goals. Reward yourself. You'll get that dopamine hit and dopamine fix that will make you feel better. But also your goal shouldn't be if you 3 months down the track, I'll reward myself once I've got there, because you want to celebrate the little wins and congratulate yourself for all the little things that you're doing as you're doing them. So if your budget allows for it, you might want to get a PT or join a gym for a certain amount of period to get things going, start seeing some changes, getting that motivation in. They might help target specific exercises that you want. It's tailored. You're not guessing. It's all there. It also could be meal prepping. So that's going to save mental load as well, whether it's mental prepping for the week or the day, having your, designated things set out so that you're not having to think more and more about it. So those are the sort of general things. Now, in the thick of anxiety and depression, motivation, how does one get it when the reality of that you want to just cover your head in your blanket, disappear from the world and not be seen or just not be involved in any of that? Even getting dressed feels like an arduous chore, let alone getting ready in activewear and going for a run. I mean, that just seems so upstream and uphill that I definitely understand that is the reality. So when it came to my time, my husband actually would force me to go. He'd take me for a walk, just like our dog, except he was excited to go and I wasn't. But he would help get the clothes out and, make me get changed, and literally held my arm as we walked with the pram. And he forced me to do that. And whilst I was annoyed at him at the time, I'm very much grateful that he did that, because I literally needed someone to force me to do it, because it did make subtle impacts on my body, being out in the fresh air versus being trapped in my room. I mean, that's really, really important. So what I would say here is for you to call in your tribe, and whether it is getting them to sit with your child while you go and exercise, if that would be helpful, whether they come with you, whether they also hold your hand and you go together, whether it's listening to a podcast or music. Music is such an upbeat thing that it can make you feel emotion and really encourage you to walk sort of forward and through to your recovery. And the other thing, which I mentioned before, was to add mindfulness into your day. And so you can do that by really trying to help calm the anxiety and use it as a very calming and grounding time within your body. So if you have the ability to call upon your tribe to help you, amazing. Maybe group classes might feel good for you. Maybe it might feel a bit too overwhelming and something that you're not wanting to do, and that's okay as well. So I guess lean into how it is that you're feeling. We're all very, very different. And I would encourage any partners or family members listening to this to encourage and help and be available to help your person be able to exercise, because it's going to make them feel better. And it is part of the whole process and puzzle. So to enable them the space, the time, the ability to do that. Now, also, it's an opportunity to use the exercise time as a very mindful activity. So as I mentioned before, feeling, touching the ground beneath you is so connective. What are the 5 senses that you can, what can you see? What can you hear? What can you feel? What can you smell? What can you taste in your mouth? Being aware of maybe even going through 5 things I hear, 5 things I see, 5 things I smell. It kind of shuts out any intrusive thoughts that you may have. And it's a very mindful activity. You could do that whilst you're walking with a friend and do that. You could even just use it as a space to get that fresh air, that prana. I'm all for outdoor activities where you can, because when you're immersed in nature, that's also healing in itself, because you're really connecting to the life that's just, outside of your body and what you're thinking and feeling. And another mindful activity whilst you're exercising is to check in with your body. Are you carrying tension anywhere on your shoulders? How are you breathing? Are you holding your breath? Is it shallow? Is it, labored? Is it deep? Is it diaphragmatic? And, what is it trying to tell you? I very much am from that energetic space where I believe that there is more than a physical injury. At times, it's our body holding on to certain aspects that we need to release and let go. And so, if we're using exercise as a time to be mindful, we can check in on certain scan. It's like a body scan meditation almost, where you can actually go top to toe and see, okay, what's happening? What's going on? What's my body trying to tell me? Anyhow, that's just another little side piece. So, really, I hope that you've taken away something from this episode. And the pearl to practice for this week really would be to write your commitment statement, to work out how it is that you can incorporate this. We're going to say 30 minutes a day on most, or if not all days as we can, whether they're in little short, sharp sessions, whether it's in a whole block. And we're going to check out some of the resources if you want to find out more. And I want you to really devise a plan that's going to work for you, and for anyone listening, to support their partner or loved one, help them, encourage them, take them for a walk, force them if it needs be. And it can take 66 days to form a habit. Slow and steady wins the race. And I hope that you've really taken some pearls away from this, because exercise, I want it to be a glorious celebration of our beautiful bodies, being grateful that we can move our arms, using it as an act of gratitude whilst we're lifting our weights, and we're saying thank you to our bones for being strong and for being able to stand up tall, and thank you for my legs that are able to feel the earth beneath me. There's so much gratitude that we can infuse in our body, and all of these little feel good moments make us feel good to choose better feel good moments. And so that is what it's all about. And so I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have had a wonderful time. Have an amazing week, and until next time, keep safe.